Hey guys, so this is after stage 7, after 2019 Tour de France stage 7, so I'm doing a recap of that. Um, Today was a sprinter stage. What can we say, right? The first question we have whether the sprinter stages are boring or not. Okay, 3 hours of the coverage on a flat road. I mean, obviously the riders were going through Burgundy, which is probably one of my favorite wine regions, and of course beautiful with all the villages and castles and wineries and little towns that they're going through. But the question is 3 hours of watching a flat sprinter stage, which nothing really happens. Now, it wasn't that bad, as we'll find out, but the question I would post is number one, what do we do to the TV coverage for 3 hours? Whether we limit it somehow to an hour or so? Or more importantly, what does the ASO, the Tour de France organizers, do in the future to kind of animate the sprinter stages a little bit more? And, whether we do more sprint bonuses with time gains, right? Like they did for this year for some of the climbs. That would be more interesting. Maybe instead of doing one sprinter's sprint for the points jersey, maybe we can do two of some sorts. Um, always an inclusion of the cobblestones or the gravel is always super interesting, but the riders hate it, right? Right? Some writers say it doesn't belong in a tour. So that's always an interesting you know uh, kind of a look at it. So what do we do? I mean, do we put in a special classification with a time bonus for a most aggressive rider? I mean, I guess in the end, the riders make the tour. So it is true that some of the GC contenders kind of rest, but the riders can animate the tour at any time, as we find out today, and every second, every minute, it can change. So I guess it would have to be an issue to kind of incentivize a rider in some sorts of a time bonus that would count towards the GC uh, to kind of make this stage a little bit more animated. I'm kind of curious about what you think. What are some of the ideas to kind of improve those sprinter stages, right? 3 hours of a long time coverage of TV coverage. What could we do, or what could ASO do to animate the stage a little bit more? I mean, we're all excited about the sprint finish, and it's all great. But today was a 230-kilometer stage, and there would be things happening, uh, you know, every hour or so. But then in between, there would be a very long time where the riders would just simply ride. So that's the question. What else? In terms of TV coverage, Bob Rawl is getting a lot better uh, with his descriptions of the castles and wineries and different monuments on the way. Yesterday, I don't know if you noticed, but Phil Liggett put Bob Rawl under the bus a little bit, right? Now, of course, we all know, for you cycling fans that have watched the tour for past 20 years, we all know what the loss of Paul Sherwin, uh, you know, the commentator for past 20 years, the partner to Phil Liggett, meant to the whole Tour de France fan base and a cycling community. So it's probably not easy, but uh, you know, uh, Phil, the other day, I think it was yesterday, they were talking about some chateau. No, I think it was a monastery. And then Phil Liggett goes to Bob Roll. He goes, well, tell us all about that monastery. And then Bob Roll kind of stopped for a second. He says, I have absolutely no idea about it. Whether we know Paul Sherwin would have known all about it. So it was really interesting to see that. And today, there was undoubtedly some talk behind the stage about actually providing details, just like in the old days. So today, Bob Roll was actually all up about throwing all sorts of facts at the different wineries and different things. So it was actually pretty funny. It was good to see. So that brings me to another topic before I'll talk about the kind of the details of the Stage 7. I'm really curious what you think about Lance Armstrong being on the official NBC coverage like he was earlier in the week. So I'm curious about your thoughts about this, and whether Lance should be actually permitted or included in the coverage of the tour. We know that he's banned from the sport for lifetime, right? Of course, nobody can stop NBC from including him in a coverage, and he now has a very kind of a popular podcast, right? So it all comes to the question, and I can see kind of like a both sides of it, right? Uh, it's kind of harsh to kind of ban the guy from the sports for the whole lifetime of it, right? Or even being around the sports. But at the same time, I do remember the damage that this whole scandal did to the cycling fan base, right? I remember watching Lance, and I remember from the beginning not really believing what he was doing, right? I mean, watching the tour in the early 90s, I remember, Lance being a fantastic one-day classic rider, fantastic rider for short, you know, hills, mountains, kind of like Alaphilippe in some ways. Um, but I never believed that he could actually win the tour, because in all the tours that he was competing, he would always drop off. But I'm thinking about the tours that he did with Motorola, back in the day. So it was really, when I was growing up, it was really kind of like a shock that Lance came back from cancer, and all of a sudden he's really good in the high mountains, which he was never good before, and then he's fantastic in a time trial all of a sudden. So I always kind of questioned that. At the same time, right? Um, you know, Looking at it from the perspective of like 15, 20 years now, the question is whether the other guys you know, were not as guilty as well. Right? I mean, look at Miguel Indurain. I mean, Miguel Indurain's wins were never, taken out of the Tour de France. And, it is highly questionable whether Miguel Indurain was not doping. I think we all know that pretty much all of the Tour de France champions after kind of Fignon and Le Mans era did something. I think there's like a famous quote from Greg LeMond that like one time he comes into the Tour de France in the early 90s, and all the guys that weren't good before in the high mountains are just better than him all of a sudden, right? EPO came into the tour. So, when I look at the old guys, when I look at the, Bjorn Rieses, when I look at Jan Orliks, right? When I look at Claudio Chiappucci, Marco Pantani, um, pretty much all of the window, Floyd Landis, right? Uh, all of the top echelon of guys, I mean, they were undoubtedly implicated. I mean, Alberto Contador, look at Alberto, right? And while I do feel that they're making Lance a little bit of an scapegoat, right? And I'm not taking sides in this. Um, the question remains whether Lance, given his suspension, a lifetime suspension, which I'm not sure if I agree with, whether he should be in an official NBC sports coverage, right? So I'm curious about your thoughts on that. And I'm wondering if NBC, now that there's been, kind of like a, throwback from that whole thing, people are complaining, or, certain amount of people are complaining about NBC featuring Lance. I'm wondering if to the end of the tour right now, Lance will actually be featured on the NBC show. It's going to be interesting. All right, back to the stage to the Burgundy, right? I have to, one more time, I really have to say that I absolutely enjoyed today seeing all the sights. What a beautiful part of the world it is, right? So stage 7, right? I got, as always, I got my little, cheat sheet right here. 230 kilometers, regular break today. Two guys go up front, and two guys are just kind of like a standard guys, right? Rossetto and Offreto, and just like I predicted, they were from Confidis, and they were from Wanty, right? The Wanty group. And Rossetto and Offredo. I think it rhymes pretty well. But yeah, I mean, standard stage, flat stage for the sprinters. The guys gained about 5 minutes, and a question that I posted in the preview was whether the sprinters teams will chase, and it seemed obvious to me that they would, and they absolutely did. So we had. We had the teams like Lotto for Caleb Ewan. We had Jumbos. We had the Quick Step providing like one guy for Viviani. We also had kind of Bora coming in later on, and we had Katusha, right? So Trek Segafredo, I think, got a free day off in a yellow jersey because these guys didn't have to do a meter of working, right? God, I mean, TJ Van Garden, that's got to be the unluckiest tour ever for him. He crashes, right? And he crashes with Dylan Tunis, the guy that won the first stage and the guy that was in a yellow jersey. And this just comes to show you how unpredictable the tour can be, right? Look at Dylan Tunis, right? A completely unexpected stage win, completely unexpected yellow, and then and then by stage 7 he's on the ground all beat up, right? Hopefully TJ is fine. We'll have to see on his condition, but it's just not a lucky Tour de France for him, and it kind of sucks because he's like the biggest American hopeful for either a stage win or top 10 GC finish. Which I actually think it's kind of disappointing that there's only like 4 American riders in this Tour de France, right? I think the sport is so incredibly popular in the States that, I mean, wow. I mean, we deserve like a bigger, so like some kind of a bigger representation here. Next thing is, the teams start chasing, right? There's a crash, and then it comes to the sprint finish for the points, right? For the green jersey. Now, and this is how crazy the tour can be, and this goes back to what I said before, that really the riders make the tour or animate the tour. So there was a regular point sprint finish. Corbelli actually stole it from Peter Sagan, which I thought was pretty interesting. But then right after the finish line for the sprint for the points jersey, there was like a couple of like accelerations, right? And there's just like 2 or 3 stronger little acceleration create what? A gaps in the peloton and break up the whole peloton. And then all of a sudden you got Dan Martin and you got Quintana behind like 30-40 seconds. So, this could have been, I mean, eventually the peloton slowed down a little bit, but this could have been a complete disaster for the 2 favorites, right? And these guys are top 5 favorites, if not a podium favorites. So this just goes to show you that, like, you need to be alert. You need to have teammates alerted all the time in a tour because you never know, right? Especially after, sprint finishes for the polka dot jersey where the pace is slightly higher. That was really kind of interesting to watch, and I only wish that it would be more of that on the road, right? instead of waiting for a sprint for 40, 50 minutes, right? So what else? The brake was caught, like I think it was like 10 miles to go. So standard, thing. I think Rossetto and Offreto, the riders who were breaking away, I think this guy's already like spent like 200 Ks in the breakaway. So they keep trying every day, and I think they both know that they'll eventually get caught. But I think that they're picking up some money along the way through the little category threes and fours, and they're picking up undoubtedly some money at the sprint finish, right? At the points sprint finish. But it's mostly for, I think, TV coverage and for a sponsor, right? Because I think they have to know that they will be caught on a day like this. The moment they get swept, Bora comes in, right? Bora starts working for Peter Sagan. And then Lotto hits the front as well. All day, Lotto was, up front. And there's a sprint finish, and I got it right again. I got it right. The German Panzerwagen won the stage. The young German Panzerwagen Gennewagen wins the stage. So right now in fantasy, I am 5 out of 7. For 7 stages, I got 5 right. I didn't get the first stage right, and I didn't get Planche de Belle right. But the other stages I got it right, so the prediction was good. Initially, I thought though Caleb Ewan, right, took the stage, and it had to go like to cameras, and then literally by a rim by a tire and a rim. Caleb Ewan was did not win, so I guess there was a lucky break. There was a lucky break for me, right? Peter Sagan, if you're, doing a fantasy, was third, right? I mean, Sagan's versatility is just incredible, right? I mean, the guy look at the pure sprint. The guy is like third or fourth. I don't think he's as fast as like the top 2 or 3 guys, but he's always super competitive, and, when the road goes up a little bit, he can actually get over some serious climbs. So he's pretty interesting. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but look at the results for today, and look who got 5th, right? The youngest guy riding in a Tour de France, Jasper Philipsen, right, from UEA, got a 5th place. Can you imagine being the youngest guy in the field and already getting a 5th place? So Jasper Philipsen is going to be a talent for the sprints to watch, right? It is not easy to get a top 10, but top 5 at this age is pretty amazing. So I'll definitely be looking out for it. The gorilla, the old gorilla, Andrew Greipel, my favorite guy, right? I mean, I watched him in his prime, and I'm really hoping he gets like one more, right? He seems to be improving a little bit. Today he gets 12th, right? He was in a breakaway the other day on Planche de Belle, right? He got 18th before, so hopefully, there's not a lot of chances, but hopefully towards the end of the tour, or maybe there's like a couple of more chances. Right in the middle, he gets his chance, and hopefully he'll get top 3. And I would definitely dream of him for winning another stage just to complete his awesome career. One thing that really kind of struck me during the sprinter stages is that they're a little bit less crazy, right? This year and last few years, they're a little bit less crazy. And what I mean by it, there's just there seems to be like a lack of several true powerful sprinters, right? With like a big time lead out trains that are just committed to these guys, and there seems to be a lack of like multiple stage winners, right? We don't have. There's been seven stages now, and a lot of them flat, and we don't have like the guys that like win all the time. And plus, there seems to be like a little bit less of like panache, almost like a little bit like a quality to, this whole like rivalry between the sprinters, right? And I don't know, for some of you that have been watching the tour for 20 years or so, I don't know if you remember, I mean, the old days, right? Old days, like 15 years ago or 20 years ago. Like, do you remember like Avdujaparov, the Tashkent Terror? Remember the terror of Tashkent? Right? How he used to like sprint like this and throw his bike, and there was all kinds of crashes and people were killing each other, right? Remember what was this? Remember Tom Beaton, right? The guy that threw the beaten at the bottle at the other guy, right? Tom Steels, remember him? Right? The guys had like attitude, right? They were the crazy sprinters. I'm thinking about, who am I thinking of? I'm thinking about like Zabel, Petacchi Alessandro, and then the king of the sprinters, Mario Cipollini, and his outfits and his girls and all kinds of things. And then I'm thinking about Oscar Freire, right? Cavendish, even Thor Hashoff. I mean, geez, I gotta list them all now because they deserve it. I mean, Greipel, of course, the gorilla is still with us. Even Kittel, Tom Boonen, Nicola Minali, Jan Sforada. Remember Jan Sforada? Olav Ludwig, right? Marcel Wurst, Zanini, Jalabert, Kirsipu. I mean, all these guys. Robbie McEwen. Remember Robbie McEwen in the old days? Geez, I mean, did I mention kind of everybody? Wurst, Nicola Minali, Stefano Zanini, right? Remember these guys? I mean, so there was like it seemed to me like it was a bigger group of pure sprinters, and they were a little bit more like hungry, and they were a little bit more competitive, and it was just really, there were like stories behind all of these guys, and they hated each other, right? So and the teams hated each other. So it's kind of interesting to see where cycling kind of have gone from like the golden years of what seemed to be golden years, unfortunately, of the 80s and the 90s, right, to the 2000s and now to 2020 almost, how it transitioned and how the sport has changed, right? I mean, just watching, I don't have an inside track on this thing, but just watching these guys back in the day and watching those terrible crashes, right? Remember like Avdujaparov crash in Paris, right? Where like took out like half of the sprinters, including Jalabert and like Tom Steels and all these guys. Those were some ridiculousness, right? And all of these guys had like absolute attitudes about them. So that's what I'm talking about. And I'm wondering if it's because of the, unfortunately, because of the drugs, right? There's just no powerhouses anymore. But I'm also thinking now that, there's probably more budgets now. Seems to be like, more budget and more money, but it's more allocated towards like the GC rider now. Sprinters are far and few between, right? Less powerful. So I'm just curious about the lack of domination, and I'm just curious whether it has something to do with, with the sport being cleaner, right? Cleaner than back in the 90s or 2000s, right? I'm curious about your thought on that. All right, so again, my prediction was right again. I'm 5 out of 7. Tomorrow we're expecting another hillier stage, so stay tuned for a recap, for a preview on that. And I'm just curious what you think on all of the 3 questions that I had. So comment below, hit like if you liked it, subscribe if you're interested in cycling or you're just a cycling fan, and hopefully you're riding out there. And stay tuned for other stages. All right, take care, guys.